Today, I have Keri Ibbitson, currently serves as the head of events for North America and Latin America at Philips. Her proven track record includes contributions to Philips Global Event Center of Excellence, where she crafts engaging strategies, driving registrations, and enhancing brand relations. In her previous roles, Keri excelled as the Senior Events Marketing Manager at Rally Health, focusing on B2B event strategy development and improving internal processes. She also led a Senior Event Advisor role at Dell Software Group, executing end-to-end strategies for trade shows and playing a pivotal role in marketing operations. Keri, it's a pleasure. It's awesome to have you here, and thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me. Really looking forward to it.
Yes. All right. So before we dive into some of the specifics, I'd love to explore your journey a little bit. You come from a background where you studied psychology, marketing, business admin. Did this blend of disciplines influence your decision to pursue a career in event management, or was it at all helpful?
Yeah, so I love talking about my journey because I didn't know there was a journey here. I always say that getting into events was a little bit of a happy accident for me. So as you mentioned, I went to school with a focus in psychology. I was very lucky in my high school, we had a marketing program that I was super engaged with. So I got to college, started doing
Wait, in
psych.
high school, you had a marketing program.
Yeah,
Wow, that's really
yeah,
cool.
super incredible, really privileged. It's a program called DECA. So all sorts of disciplines. I was really quite lucky. Our school took it really seriously. You go to a competition a couple times a year, and really
Awesome.
introduces this sense of entrepreneurship really early. And I honestly probably have that to contribute a good chunk of my career too. Because once I got to college and I was in our Psych 101 classes, I was happy to be there, but I was like, where am I going to take this? And I really missed some of the things I'd been doing in marketing. And so I actually transferred schools and ended up at UMass Dartmouth. And while I was there, since I was a transfer student, I joined the Student Activities Board because I wanted to make friends and get involved and know kind of what was going on campus. And that was my first kind of soiree into events. So I took that through during my education. I continued to double major in psych and business, which I loved. I volunteered and worked at the Market Research Center at the university, supporting market research projects. And I did that through my graduate program. I then walked into the student activities office and helped them do some research about how to take funding and apply it to student programming. And then I graduated and I thought I needed to get this big girl job in marketing research. Were behind me, and I didn't even know there was a career path. And marketing research was horribly boring. It was a lot of data crunching, and I was like, I don't know if this is the right fit. And I ended up at a small tech company, helping them do some of their trade shows. They liked my event background that I had in college, and that group, the day I started, was bought by Dell. And that really just catapulted my entire experience in events and my journey. I was very graciously placed on their global events team, and I learned from some of the best in the business very early on. People who had very long-standing careers in events, and taught me everything that I knew and jumped right in. And I spent the next 5 years doing all sorts of events for Dell, everything from our trade shows, internal kickoff programs, if user groups, if they were hosting a program, I got to be a part of it, and it was amazing and really ignited my love for the corporate event space.
I love that. And I love that you're very active during college, and being part of those groups definitely helped a ton. That's great. I love seeing
Oh,
that.
in a way that you don't realize. Like, it really just kind of snuck up on me. Like I said, I walked out of school thinking, oh, if I want to do events, I have to stay in higher education and do,
Right.
events for students. And it really was my analytical background from marketing research, but they were participating in a show that still has some legs. It's called VM World, where they bring together all sorts of virtualization software, vendors, and they were highly focused on demand gen. It was get every scan you can. Everyone here is our target audience. We need to capture, capture, capture. And so I did my first VMworld. And like I said, very shortly after that, Dell got involved and our team was kind of integrated into the bigger picture.
Mm.
And they were like, you've done VMworld, you can do trade shows. And I was like, that sounds great. And I just started to run with it. And the next thing you know, it was Microsoft trade shows, Oracle Open World. I really got to see some of the best of the best very early on.
We don't, and so I love that you've had that experience with trade shows, as well as conferences and other different types of events. I want to jump into collaboration with stakeholders, and again, this question is relevant to your experience as a whole. Feel free to pick anything that comes to mind. Events, when you're putting it together, involves a ton of collaboration between various stakeholders, right? You're talking about vendors. So between internal teams, external partners, vendors, how do you ensure success when it comes to maintaining the right set of channels for collaborating with all these stakeholders? What have you experienced in the past? What are things that you've come across that work? What are things that you're like, I've been part of this and I learned not to do that? What comes to mind?
It's communication is really the first thing, right? And smaller organizations, it's super easy to cross collaborate. Having somebody in sales super involved in your planning to have their feedback and perspective. Your CMO, your chief product people, if you're dealing with engineers, you have your sales engineer there to say, does this resonate? And it's really great to be able to build a room of those people to help field in that feedback of, are we going in the right way? Are we
Right.
setting up with the right technology? It definitely gets more complicated when you're in bigger organizations because then you're almost boiling the ocean trying to make sure you have everyone in there for feedback, and that doesn't always work there. But being really transparent, having it well documented, providing multiple opportunities for people to kind of bring feedback in to make sure their voice is heard, and to make sure that their considerations are a part of it are huge. So even if they can't make your weekly call where you're establishing this, really taking out the time to say, have we brought all the right players in? Do we have the right perspectives here? And aligning on that in the earlier stages is huge because there's nothing worse than getting 75% down the runway of an event and then you're accepting a lot of ad hoc feedback and then you're trying to make changes on the fly. Those tend to get expensive, and can be pretty
Mm.
disruptive. So as long as you're really in the front end, you've spent a lot of time kind of figuring out who are our stakeholders, have we fielded all the right people to be a part of this, and then really making sure they have the opportunity to deliver feedback in a timely fashion. It makes collaboration a beautiful thing, and really incredible to see.
I love you mentioned like whether it's a weekly call, depending on an event, and feel free to pick any that come to mind. How frequent are these, I guess, meetings that you're having with a team, with these external stakeholders as well?
As the event manager, I mean, you're probably in 7 to 10 work streams a week trying to make sure different facets of an event happen, and it really depends on the event and the different areas that you're activating in. But in terms of like a core team, usually like a bi-weekly is pretty good if you're closer to that like 12, 10, 8 month timeline away from an event. Like it's not everyone's top priority, but we need to kind of keep it a little bit top of mind, keep action
Mm.
items going. A bi-weekly, a monthly is probably sufficient. As you get closer and as it starts to kind of pick up steam in your deadlines and having to really commit to things, those weekly work streams are huge. It really keeps you accountable. I've been on teams where they even meet twice a week, and that's really like task-based type stuff. People were chasing for content, digital activation assets. Do we have speakers going? Are they well prepped? Just really making sure all the minutiae is getting done, are incredibly helpful for like those weekly cadences. If you're doing like a C-suite level update on how things are going, so like when we used to do Dell kickoffs, we'd meet with like our C-suite stakeholders maybe once a month, really delivering just super relevant information, which is a very similar pattern to things that we do at Philips as well. So it's really mapping it against, the teams of people that are doing it, those stakeholders, those collaborations, what makes the most sense for them, and how often do they need the information. If you're super task-based, we can be meeting pretty frequently. But if you're more so part of that higher level discussion, major decision makers maybe just need those milestone updates, you can definitely kind of take a step back and adjust your schedule.
As you communicate with all the stakeholders and you get you get the event rolling, and how do you figure out and how do you measure the success of that event? And I know that this is like a universal, everyone in the industry, rightfully so, gets asked this question. But like, are there particular metrics that you prefer to use?
Yeah, I mean, measuring an event, that's just, that's like the 101 question. And I know part of what brought me here too, right, is you've had these conversations with chief marketing officers who are like, we're spending all this money on events. And that's not unusual. So it's very common for the first thing people want to know are like, well, how are we measuring this investment? How are we measuring the success? And it really looks different show to show. And when I push, anytime I have this conversation, different organizations, different industries, the first question is always the same. What are your goals? If your goals are demand gen, like they were when I was with the virtualization software group, they were chasing engineers. They wanted to speak to anyone there. So we measured success on how many scans did we have? From those scans, how many of those turned into sales qualified leads? And then did those leads turn into any sort of opportunity or deal down the pipeline? It required an incredible amount of coordination with our sales team, having a really active CRM, and just regular check-ins and updates to kind of track that ROI. And that was great. They would look at that, they would focus on the ones that produce the best, and they would adjust their investments depending on how that came back. Demand gen is like a fill the funnel type of tactic. And to be honest, I think it's one, especially when you're looking at B2B events, that people want to focus on. So we still are trying to break the habit once in a while of, scan everyone. That means we had value here. But as you started to get to cultures and groups that have goals or maybe sales timelines that you're not making a sale right away, or maybe the sales decision is an incredibly complex one, like we see at Philips when you're doing medical equipment and selling into hospital systems, that's not a decision somebody makes necessarily on a dime. And sometimes the conversations we're having right now don't really see any sort of fruition for another 3 to 4 years. So how do you measure success on that? So then you start looking granularly. Again, it kind of comes down to tracking who came by, who did we speak to, and then evaluating, is there a lifetime cost associated to an account? And so having that ability to engage with them, are we influencing pipeline in any sort of way? It takes a little bit more of a collaborative approach with your operations teams, again, CRMs, to really take a look at how you're impacting those things, but is massive and pays dividends. Some of our digital activations or thought leadership. So you're hosting a session, reach is huge. How many people did we reach? How many people did we speak to? Are we moving the needle on social media while we're at these events or while we're driving the events? Are we dominating that space? And so all of those things kind of come in. Those really easy to grasp metrics are always the ones that people want to grab onto, things like number of leads and ROI. But again, if you're in a certain case of your sales timeline is a little bit different, those numbers aren't going to be super impressive to you and would likely tell you, hey, why would we invest here? We didn't see ROI out of this right away. So it's really having a major redirect in the beginning around what are your goals in going to an event or hosting your own event. And then really paying attention to your KPIs and what makes the most sense for measuring those goals. And that looks a little different kind of show to show. But there's always a way. There's always something. So many tools out there. There's all sorts of metrics. I really love this one we've been doing around dwell time. We build this really impressive booth experience at a really major, large radiology trade show. And the booth is ginormous. And so by the time somebody gets to the beginning of it, they have a demo, they get to the other end, they've seen things along the way. how long have they stayed in your booth? Are people actually following our journey? And you can even get down to seeing how people journey through your booth. So do you have the right activations? Do you have the right demos? Do you have the right content that people are interested in hearing? And it's such a unique metric and perspective that I had used before coming to Phillips that is so telling, and really gives us great insight into how, our events are performing.
I love that. During COVID, there was a rise of virtual and hybrid events as a way to keep attendees engaged. After COVID, live events came back with a vengeance. Have you experienced pros and cons for each segment when it comes to attendee engagement within the virtual or hybrid or live? And where do you spend most of your time right now with teams? Is it mostly live, or is it a combination?
We're definitely back live. I got to be honest, most event managers were a little nervous during COVID. We were doing all this stuff virtual. Were people ever going to want to come face to face again? And boy, they absolutely do. And there are definitely some events, right, that I think some of the fat has been trimmed, for lack of a better term, of shows that have continued to thrive or have evolved and have become this pressure point for people to say, oh, I've got to be there. Like, this is going to be my chance to network. This is going to be my chance to see something new. And then we've seen some shows that really haven't had the ability to come back from COVID, aren't driving the same attendance. I think one thing that it has driven is time is important to people. It's stretched everywhere. We see it at Phillips with our customers. They're in healthcare. We know there is tremendous staff shortages. So we've really got to target what are the right opportunities to get to these physicians and to these doctors and IDNs. And they're going to be very selective about what they go to. That being said, having a hybrid model now is the expectation. It really set up COVID, allowing all sorts of means by which to bring content to the person. That has not gone away. So if they can't be at a session, they want it recorded and they want it in their email to go back to. A lot of groups are also really focusing on not even necessarily the big show, but how do we create regional touch points to meet people where they are, and kind of make it less of a big travel experience. It allows them to stay close to home to their priorities, but allows you to still get those networking opportunities, still allows you to learn. So those
I'm guessing those
models,
regional touch points are smaller, so it'll be a bit more intimate.
Yes, which feedback across the board, anytime you try to listen, and this has been my experience across industry, is why are you going to an event? And a lot of it usually boils down to two things: networking, and I want to know what's new. I want to see what's on the horizon. So there's some sort of education they're looking for there. So the regional based things, they are smaller, right? Like they tend to be usually can do something a little less expensive. You have usually like a regional group of support that can really dial in, and you're meeting them where they are. Road shows have become like a largely very popular thing in the last since COVID, because we were able to go and meet people where they were without the struggle of coming to a major city. The ramifications of COVID and just illness in general were still there. Trade shows are petri dishes, and so this kind of reduces a little bit of that fear that people had, and just again meeting them where they are in their schedule has been a huge part of the experience.
When it comes to figuring out if a regional show makes sense in terms of size, and I'm sure that this actually leads us to the next thing, so we can combine it, but I was talking about prioritizing budget versus vision, right? Like resources. So we want to do the best, but we're all restricted to our resources. As an example, with these road shows, how do you go about figuring out when is the best time to activate one? Like starting from there. And then then the next question is, how do you prioritize like the expenses that are related to marketing and to communications for these events?
So when I was at Rally, we did a really cool road show where we were trying to drive registrations in our platform with the employees of the employers that we offered the benefit to. So we would take this road show around, and a lot of it is just like you're meeting them where they are. You definitely need to take into consideration what time works best for them. So, trying to stay away from like major holidays and summer breaks. And we one year did the tour down south and everything was outdoor and very physical activation. And it was like 102 degrees and humid. And we were like, this wasn't a great idea. We maybe should
Right.
look at doing this in the fall next year or something like that, and adjusting, like just thinking of those geographical different elements, so that you kind of have the best opportunity for success and to get people to come out and engage. It's the same thing at Phillips. Like we have a group that is going to take our MR on the road. And they really are focused around customer need. So when is it the best time for the customer? We're really mapping out right now, where are the right stops, when are the right stops. And a lot of it kind of correlates to where is the biggest need, who are people who aren't getting to some of our trade shows. So this is a great opportunity for us to bring it to them. And so it's, again, a very collaborative, based on your goals, front end discussion to map that out. That takes kind of a lot of people bringing in their feedback. I might only be thinking of the weather, but our sales guys who know our customers best can really say, hey, we know April is a great time point for them. They've got their budget secured for the year at this point. They know what they'll have. This will be a great time to engage in conversation. So it's, again, very collaborative discussion to figure out where you go and when. And then how do you prioritize resource? I mean, that is like the name of the game this year. It is no surprise to anyone. Last year, we saw across all sorts of event activations, whether it's staying in hotels, whether you're building booths, whatever it is, the cost of services and labor have gone up exponentially since COVID. And to be honest, a lot of marketing budgets have not. We know a lot of companies are really trying to scale and spend wisely. And it's really hard as the events person to be like, hey, I need triple the budget because the cost of services have gone up. So now we're just being really critical about where are we going and where is the right investment. And again, I'm going to sound like a broken record, but it comes back to your goals. What are your goals for the year? Who are the right people you want to get to? And then that makes it really easy to decide where to invest. And sometimes how to invest is a conversation we have frequently. A lot of times groups will say, well, I have to be at this event. It's so important for me to be at this event. Well, it doesn't mean we have to go with a huge booth. We can target a thought leadership session that gets you in the door. You can have the conversations, you can have the networking. And that traditionally can cost a lot less than building out like a massive experience that might not make sense for us at that event. So it is being really open to different ways, identifying your goals, who you're trying to meet with, and adjusting to those needs.
You talked about two primary reasons for people to attend events, and it's the networking, and a lot of time it's the education. How do you, and this might be related to even before an event, during an event, but especially after an event, how do you concentrate on the educational piece of it? And when, as we're talking about resources and we're talking about communicating, sharing insights, educating your customers or your prospects, what have you been bullish on when it comes to, this could be before an event, during an event, or after event, but like, are there certain channels, are there certain areas that you've been placing a lot of resources and emphasis on when it comes to educating your customers?
It's a fine mix of it all. Like a really successful event plan hits all of those channels, pre, during, and post, to be super effective in that. A lot of folks don't think about kind of that marketing activation going into an event until a little late down the pipeline, but it's all stuff we really take for granted. Showing up in your social posts. Like we have this amazing session that's happening. Doing targeted SEO and SEA is massive. Having teams kind of communicate and advocate for what we are showing and what we can share about that, what the educational opportunities are, who's on your panel, who's the expert. Putting that out into the ether before a show is so, so important. Because by the time they get on site, there are so many barriers to their attention. So being part of like, oh, while I'm there, this is really important to me. I want to focus on this. And then during the show, a lot of, particularly like B2B event type stuff, there is opportunities to continue to promote, sessions or content or things that you're doing, or to drive them to your space, to make sure that they're still walking away with what they want. And then more than anything, the follow-up after the fact, to keep that conversation going, to keep that momentum going and the opportunity to continue to learn. Is there a follow-up webinar that we have scheduled that has to do with the session that they sat in on when they were at the event with us? So what does that journey continue to look like? Is there content that we can send them? Was there a white paper we just did that we can kind of send out? Hey, we saw us at this event. We thought you'd think this piece of information was super helpful. So really thinking about that journey and thinking about more so, how do you keep that conversation going after you've had that touch point at that activation, whatever it is? How do you kind of build something that continues that conversation and leverages those key marketing tactics? Email is like the bane of my existence. I love it and I hate it, but it's such a great tool. Post an event to continue to share and continue to connect. But again, really goes back to what we said earlier about collaboration. Folks are going to lean more into a one-to-one outreach from a salesperson who they're familiar with than just some sort of blanket marketing email. But again, it's really about creating opportunity to continue the conversation that you started before they got there and that you had when they were in the moment with you, and then how do we keep it going further?
Keri, how do you, how many events are your own and how many events are you participating in? Like if we were looking at a pie, what would that pie look like in terms of like an estimate of a breakdown of that?
Sure. So like when I was at Dell and even here at Philips, most of the events that I'm responsible for and my team is responsible for are other people's events, upwards of probably like 80% of what we're doing.
Okay.
And a lot of that, it's not that we're not doing some internal stuff for sure. But with our team, our primary focus is definitely the B2B activations. When I was at Dell, we did a little bit more with some like user group type stuff, and they had Dell World. And so they had a lot of proprietary activation that then made up like another great percentage of work. At Philips, we were really great at tagging some proprietary activity onto B2B activity. So really, again, creating that extension of, it's not just the splash in the pan at the show, we're continuing the conversation in other ways. But our proprietary activity, at least for me right now, is definitely a smaller piece to the pie. But again, depending on, when I was at Rally, it was completely inverse to that. Almost everything we did was proprietary.
Wow.
And only 10% of what we were doing was industry facing. So again, really comes down to your audience, your goals, and how the events team is set up to support you and where you think your most value is.
Having experienced both sides, is there a difference between I wouldn't say resources or effectiveness, but like or just time that is needed and allocated from a team when you are having to create your own versus having to participate, to kind of create an experience, but in someone else's space? Like, do you have any thoughts around that of like Mhm.
They both take the same amount of legwork. Different task lists, different considerations to make, but they both require a tremendous amount of thought and process. Activating in somebody else's pool, you've got to figure out what their parameters are. How do you make your situation work in their arena? When you're doing your own, you're building from scratch, which also brings along its own set of complexities. Both are amazing and both are incredibly fulfilling when they're done. To having pulled them off. I will say I feel like internal stuff tends to be, especially when you're doing, like when we were doing sales kickoff with Dell or incentive events. I did a C-suite event when I was at Rally. There is a pressure that comes from impressing your people internally that's almost a little bit different than trying to impress your external customers. Just as important, if not more. But I will say
that makes sense. It's kind of like you're in your home, it's a home game.
It's a home. That's 1,000% correct. And at Rally, we had some really incredible ones. And the pride I had at the end of those, when people you work with every day come up to you and were like, this was amazing. I get to do all of these amazing things with people I work with every day. And this is just such a moment. It really has invigorated me to do great work moving forward. Like that's super fulfilling. And is such a great experience.
When you're whether hosting your own event or when you're participating someone else's, when it comes to sponsors and exhibitors, what what are some of the pitfalls, or before even jumping into pitfalls, when it comes to sponsors and exhibitors, does that take is that a major emphasis when you're hosting your own event? And it could be across, again, it's not just where you are now, but based on your previous experiences. For someone that has not been in that space and not been in that world, is there this massive difference when you're hosting your own thing versus participating somewhere else, when it comes to sponsorships and exhibitors?
Yeah, I've been so lucky to be on both sides of that, where I'm the one buying the sponsorship and being the exhibitor, and where I'm the one working with somebody who's trying to buy a sponsorship, right? And at the end of the day, you really want to find something that feels mutually beneficial. That's where you're going to kind of create the most success.
Mm.
Exhibitors and people are going to want to buy sponsorships if they feel like they're getting something out of this, right? Like I don't buy sponsorships to be like, oh, this is a good thing to do. You do it because again, you're trying to fill some sort of goal. You want some sort of placement. So it's challenging on both sides. I do find that when you're the one purchasing, it's so easy to kind of get a prospectus from an association that says, here are all the sponsorships you can pick from. These are the levels, pick from this menu. And the one thing that I've really pushed, and I had a great mentor about this, is don't be afraid to ask for a la carte or something custom. They've
Mm.
created these things for ease of purpose for sure, but don't be afraid to try to push the envelope to create something that is great for you. And at Rally, we did that a lot. It was very rare that we would go in and buy a sponsorship that was pre-baked with a pre-baked space. We really pushed those associations or those groups. You'd be like, we want something different. If we're going to invest this type of money, we want something that's going to set us apart. And it's amazing. And so I think that's something that not enough groups do. They just kind of take the baseline offering and they take it and run. But don't be afraid to have those conversations, because at the end of the day, no matter what side of it you're on, you both want the same thing out of this. And how do you find something that makes you both happy?
What has been what comes to mind when I ask about the most effective sponsorship channel or experience that you activated and it really worked out for you?
Um, that's a great question. And I'm a little biased, and being in events for so long, but I love the main stage moments where you are driving the thought leadership or the tone for an event. We did one with Philips where our CEO was on stage at a major health event, and the energy that drove during the event and the morale it drove for our team on site, just that buzz it created for us was incredible.
Mm.
And then the amount of people that came to us and were like, his comments about servant technology really spoke to me. I'd love to talk to you guys more about what you're doing in that space. Like it just was incredible. And then a lot of times you get to bucket that content and it gets to continue to live on. We used it in our socials, we used it in internal channels, and really got this huge. It may have happened at the event, but the content we got out of that created a culture and a narrative that we were able to keep going through the rest of the year, and even helped kind of determine some of the narrative we were doing into the year following. And
Wow.
so I find moments like that really valuable because, yes, super impactful in that moment, in that event, but there's so much you can take from that and the ripple effect of it that's really impactful.
I love that. So the live aspect, building that, bringing a thought leader from the organization and having them be able to connect with everyone and talk about whatever that product is, that by far so far has been one of the best uh
and
experiences.
and more so than that, it's even more impactful when we bring and anybody in event marketing will tell you this, when you're bringing like a customer or somebody you've worked with who you have solved a pain point of theirs. Because a lot of people in the audience are there to solve. They want you to help them solve something that's causing them pain. And if
Mm.
you have a proof point, somebody who is their peer, even in another place, says, wow, like this relationship, this product, this whatever the case may be, really improved our day to day. It changed things for us. It gave us the results. That speaks to the audience more than anything even our CEOs could say. I
Mm.
used to be in benefits for employee providers, and if your session did not have a customer who was saying like, "Hey, this is how this really impacted our group of people. These were the results." People didn't attend your session. They didn't really care what you had to say. They wanted to see what you've done for their peers who are suffering from similar things and
Mm.
how you helped improve that. And those are the ones that really speak. Not to say that, some of the major CEO moments on stage aren't impactful, but even beyond that are ones where you really have the proof in the pudding to say, like, here's the use case, and this is how it can help you as well.
I love that. I love covering thought leadership and all the ways in which organizations can build thought leadership for themselves. What you just shared is one example of bringing your thought leader, having a discussion, but even more than that, bringing in a customer to share a use case that can really resonate with your audience. Are there other ways that you've invested in thought leadership through the event space?
I speaking sessions are definitely kind of a major one. Investing in there's like all sorts of sponsorships they have out there. In the medical space, it's not uncommon to invest in, you see a lot of companies doing grants, sponsoring certain levels of research, which
Oh.
is just kind of a very niche, can be and it gets complicated in healthcare how that's done, but it's super important, and it also shows what you're aligned to.
Mm.
And so you see a lot of that pop up. Some folks will really target certain events that have a certain status in their field or industry,
Mhm.
and really buying out the branding. It's not a big thing we do, to be honest, at Philips, but I have seen other groups where by dominating the show with their brand everywhere, there's like this unsolicited correlation that like we own this space, we are a leader
Right.
in this space, and it's semi-subconscious. Nobody's actually delivering any content to you other than their brand, but it's impactful in some spaces. I saw that a lot in tech. It was, can we paint the room with our colors, even though this isn't our show, to make it feel like we're the ones really leading it. And you
Mm.
see that a lot. But a lot of the opportunities are, how do I get on stage? How do we promote in the right rooms? A lot of groups will offer a kind of a C-level meeting running into a larger show that's directly based around other C-suite leaders. And that's really big too. When I was at Rally, we used to host our own. So we hosted our own intimate C-suite gathering. And so kind of the opposite of buying and branding everything out, but we created the room where we were bringing in these C-suite leaders to talk about how they were challenging different issues in healthcare. And even though it was only a room of 30 people, we were being looked at as like this thought leader and this innovator for kind of creating this space where they were able to collaborate and have these conversations.
Were those conversations while they happen live, were they recorded? Did you record a lot of that to be able to share afterwards what you were describing?
Some of them, in some cases, a lot of times it's the safety net of it being organic in a small, intimate
Mm.
way like that. But a lot of times I've seen us panels get recorded, and I've seen roundtables get recorded, and even if it's just transcribed so that you have the audio, you have things to go back to. At that C-suite when we did at Rally, we'd record certain pieces of it. Definitely some of our panel sessions, we were really big about recording. Some of the more like intimate one-to-one conversations, it was how do we kind of take some of that content and make sure it comes into the rest, and how do we deliver that after. But in the right moments, absolutely. And it's always wonderful when you can do that, because the content you can then create out of that after the fact to live on is super valuable.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. Uh, have have you do you have to concentrate if we're talking about external events versus internal events for the corporation, that falls as well under your responsibility?
So not currently at Philips, but it has in previous, like when I was at Dell, we did all of it. So we were doing our internal stuff, we were doing external stuff. We had a really big events team. And so we were able to kind of divide and conquer our resources. But while I was there, I was responsible for helping coordinate our sales kickoff event, which we did globally. And so we would have an event in Vegas, an event in Copenhagen, and then one in Singapore for all those different
Wow.
markets. And then a couple of weeks later, I'd be setting up our booth at Microsoft Ignite. And I loved that. I loved being able to kind of go in and out of both spaces, but it isn't super uncommon in organizations for there to be a group of people who are maybe more focused on internal events and that's their skill set, versus folks that are focused on like a B2B or even like field activation, which tends to be a little bit different. I've definitely experienced that each company manages it a little bit differently. But at Philips, I'm definitely more focused on our B2B activations. We do a pretty robust list for the year. And then, like I said, we definitely tack on some proprietary work to those things.
Yeah.
But most of our stuff's B2B.
Has the approach with internal when you're at Dell, does the approach differ when you are doing things that are internal versus external? Are there certain differences and ways in which you ask yourself or do things differently, I guess?
I would say when you're doing internal stuff, for whatever reason, people think you can turn something out in a shorter amount of time. The beauty of an external event, and especially like those year over year shows, the B2B ones, like every year I know this event is going to happen, maybe even at this time. So it makes it a little easier to plan for. You know what your runway looks like. When you have a sales executive coming to you to say, hey, you know what? We're going to do a sales kickoff and I need it done in the next 12 weeks. It changes everything. And so you're just kind of moving in a different pace than you normally would.
Mm.
And COVID really threw, I think, a lot of that stuff too, like a major wrench into that planning for people. And so even at Philips, some of those internal programs, we were trying to feel out like how much of this do we keep hybrid for a little while so that we can get everyone. And then when they were ready to go back in person, some people are like, are we sure? Are we ready? Are we ready? And I know that that was a common, this is one of the first years I've seen even industry wide across my LinkedIn. Sales kickoffs are back with a vengeance. People are dying to get back together with their coworkers, align on strategy for the year. So I think we're seeing a big resurgence of that. But the prep for it is a little bit different because it's internal. There's like this assumption of flexibility and that sort of thing. But honestly, managing your internal stakeholders is usually a bit more challenging than the external ones. And getting deliverables and that sort of thing, where, like you said, you're playing on your home court. It's like, oh, we've got time. We know all the players involved. We're not working on somebody else's, against somebody else's expectations. It's just our own. But when you're in the thick of the details, it's like, no, all of these things still need to get done in a certain order and preferably in a certain amount of time. But there is there's an energy about it that's definitely a bit different when it's internal versus external.
That makes a ton of sense. Are there any for this year? Are there any bets that or areas in which you're going to place more emphasis in or resources on that speak out to you? Maybe it's related in particular to your industry or to the overall trend of events, but anything that comes to mind to that?
I'm so excited you asked this question. There's kind of two trends that I'm seeing right now. And one is definitely like sort of doing less or doing more with less. Budgets are largely flat for a lot of people. In some cases, they're reduced. But a lot of the feedback I've been seeing in some of the industry community that I'm involved in is, our budgets are not increasing, but costs are. So we really need to figure out how are we investing smart? How do we do more with less, or really identify that impactful moment. So I think that conversation is going to continue to dominate, and how are we most efficient with our dollars? Secondarily, the one that's right behind it and I'm most excited about is sustainability in events. It is cropping up everywhere. I'm starting to see it in panels in ways that I haven't seen it before. And I'll be on at Philips, you know, sustainability is a huge part of our core values as an organization. And my European coworkers, the ways that they're able to measure their sustainable execution of events is completely different than it is here in the United States. It just hasn't been a priority. You can go to a convention center in Germany and plug in and know what your wattage was. They'll measure the amount of waste you took out. And we just haven't, the convention centers here and even some of our hotels, they might be LEED rated and that sort of thing. But that level of detail per exhibitor, per activity isn't always as readily available. So just focusing on sustainability in general, practices that make us more sustainable, events in general are super wasteful. Swag is like one of my hot touch points. I love swag and I hate swag, super unsustainable. So how do you bring something to people that matters? People that are still doing paper printouts, like it is time to get with the curve. We're not doing paper printouts anymore. And these are just basic things, you know. But trade show materials, really looking at, we spend a lot of time with our vendor who helps us at Philips to focus on, you know, the stuff we're using to build these experiences. How often can we reuse this? What's the life on this? How are we really driving some sustainable actions with our builds? Because you'll see it. If you go to like a CES, you'll watch people build up these incredible things and then it gets teared down and thrown in a garbage bin.
It's true. And these events are so massive. How have you come across companies helping with that sustainability, offering certain really cool services to come in
slowly but surely. And to be honest, a lot of them are North American based that I've seen. It's not to say they don't exist. Ones that
you've come across,
have been like, there was a Australian vendor who's doing remarkable things in reusable flooring, for instance, which was a really interesting thing for us. And my hope is we'll see more people like that kind of start to come on board. And again, the conversation is getting louder. I'm going to be at Exhibitor Live next week, which is a trade show for event managers, which I'm super excited about. And several of the sessions are around sustainability. And I cannot wait to hear what other people are doing and how we're going to start moving the needle, because it's massively important. Philips, I'm so grateful. They do a lot to, you know, even our travel, we think about that, our transportation costs, looking at vendors that are doing hybrid and what can we do to offset emissions and contribute to things that do that. So it's super important. It's something that I'm really hoping we can start to influence the industry on. It's becoming more and more important to exhibitors. And I can only hope that our partners, like again, the hotels, the convention centers, really start leaning in to give us opportunity to impact those things.
Just like carbon credits are allotted for polluters, are there any types of aside from obviously doing what's right, are there any types of benefits that are being offered to companies that are making a huge, you know, effort in even if it might cost them more for them to be more sustainable? Are there any sorts of credits or things out there that you've come across in this space of sustainability?
Not that I've seen yet. And again, it's not to say that it doesn't exist, but I haven't come across it yet. But it would be great. It would be amazing to start incentivizing that type of behavior somehow. You know, you see kind of the credit purchasing, especially in large corporations for things like T&E. You know, folks that are traveling a lot, we offset the emissions by buying credits. In the event space specifically, I haven't seen it. And I wouldn't be surprised if we start seeing the major convention centers start getting offered credits, which would then start to lean into asking your exhibitors to participate in more sustainable type behavior. And there might start to be a trickle down effect. It's like I said, it's starting to gain traction. There are groups out there working really hard to recognize those that are starting to drive sustainable events in whatever fashion that is, and really raise their profile to say, these are some best practices we need to start taking forward in the industry. And credits, I think, would only continue to enforce that. Everyone loves a good incentive, and that would be a great one for folks to consider.
I love that. Keri, thank you so much for your time, for sharing your journey, your insights, your experiences. Really appreciate it.
We'll talk soon. Thank you.
Bye-bye.